Hi there, or in Eora, the most ancient language of the Sydney Basin, Warami. Good to see you, or at least it's good to be seen. Okay, so it's my second video log. I don't know if you enjoyed the first one. This is all supposed to be autobiographical, so to speak. It's not written, yeah. You gotta feel writing. So it's not autobiographical, it's just auto something. Anyway, I thought of addressing something along the lines of coincidence, or rather coincidences in my life, happenstance. I've been surprised at some point. I think I was towards the end of my days in Romania. Yeah, so I migrated with the family at the end of 2004. And then sporadically, while being in Sydney, yeah, I was, I don't know, surprised to find myself thinking of my life. I think it was a way of seeking some patterns. This won't take anyone by surprise. We human beings enjoy living in a, let's call it, familiar world, one that has meaning, one that makes sense, one that's purposeful. And so what I did, I began to connect dots of various events of my life. Like, for instance, I was born on the 10th of January. I won't mention the name, the year, doesn't matter anyway. The 10th of January, which of course didn't mean much for me, apart from having the annual birthday, which wasn't a party usually. It was something in our very little family. But then later, when I was a deacon at the princely church of Domnița Bălașa in downtown Bucharest, I served there for 5 years or so. I discovered that the church had a small silvery box close to the sanctuary, which had as its lid a face. And it was written there that it's the face of Saint Gregory of Nyssa, which, by the way, people who know how Gregory looks in Byzantine iconography know that that's not his face. That's not how he looks, at least in iconography. And that box included some parts of his skull, what in traditional forms of Christianity we call relics. And of course, I knew that the day of remembrance for Saint Gregory of Nyssa is the 10th of January. Coincidence? Could be. Yeah, so I was born on his day of remembrance, and I haven't been called Gregory, of course, as you know from the previous video log. And I began my ordained ministry in a church that possessed, still does I assume, relics of the saint of that day, Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Coincidence? Fortuitous concurrence of events? But that gave me to think, what would that mean for me? Well, it didn't mean much anyway, because for some reason I was never into Saint Gregory of Nyssa. I read some of his stuff. I have even published a couple of articles studying his apology for the Exaimeron, for the 6 days. I returned to those articles and put them together in my Humankind and the Cosmos, the blue book there. And they are now the 6th chapter, could be? Yeah, 6th chapter of the book. But yeah, I wasn't much into Gregory of Nyssa. Still am not, for some reason. I might talk about this at some point, just to whet your appetite. I found especially his spiritual message, too obtrusive, too cultivated, and for many years I suspected him of inauthenticity. Yeah. I haven't delved yet too much into his works to see if it's just a hunch that I shouldn't worry about, or something that might be confirmed by what I find there. Anyway, that's strike one. One coincidence. Another one has to do with the same church, but it's a different sort of tangent. It's my second birth, as it were. My baptism. As an infant, many Orthodox know this. You are baptized after a few weeks, sometimes months. Some other families postpone that for a while. In my case, I was baptized a few months, must have been, or something. I don't know, don't remember. Can't remember anyway. When I was baptized, and I was baptized in the local church, the local parish in working class neighborhood of Bucharest, or something that was built in the communist era, the neighborhood of Berceni, place of my childhood. And the patronal festival of the church, a very tiny thing, really small. I don't think you could squeeze more than 50 or so people inside. The patronal feast was the Ascension of the Lord. Surprise, surprise, when I was ordained to diaconate for that same church of Domnița Bălașa. By the way, Domnița means princess in Old Romanian. Bălașa, that would be her name, which would translate, I think, as Blanca, Snow White. Yeah, so white has to do with white. And the patronal festival of Domnița Bălașa is the Ascension of the Lord. Coincidence? I don't know. Yeah. Then later in life, as a matter of fact, I was doing my doctoral research to write a dissertation in the late 1990s at the University of Bucharest. I worked mainly on Saint Maximus the Confessor. By the way, an aficionado of Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Many people who have an idea of Gregory of Nyssa sometimes turn to his own works via Maximus. Maximus made him popular, at least to the eyes of modern scholarship. Mid 20th century, Hans Urs von Balthasar, wrote a beautiful synthesis about St. Maximus. The Cosmic Liturgy, I think, was called this book, and he revealed through painstaking textual analysis the dependence of Maximus on many, at least literary and theological tropes found already in St. Gregory of Nyssa. Anyway, so I did my first dissertation basically on St. Maximus. Yeah, that's another story, but briefly, the dissertation had as a pretext an analysis of the anthropic cosmological principle, which was trendy in the 80s and 90s, something of a philosophical kind of approach to coincidences in cosmology, physics, and other sciences, in fact. Coincidences which the promoters of the anthropic principle would take in the sense of having to do with our existence, human beings. In other words, the fact that we exist has something to do with the fundamental trait of the universe, of created reality, as we Christians would call it. Anyway, so I was doing St. Maximus, and as a matter of fact, I developed during those years some kind of private devotion towards St. Maximus. Still has his icon here. I don't read him too much. Oh, that's an icon. From a monastery in the island of Patmos, Greece. But yeah, I was the Maximus guy at the time in the Department of Systematic Theology of the Orthodox Faculty of the University of Bucharest, Orthodox Theological Faculty, whatever it was called. And yeah, Maximus. All my students at the time knew me as the Maximus guy. And when I was ordained, what year was it? I don't remember. 97 or so? 97, yeah. Ordained to diaconate. Yet another surprise, without my planning anything. I was ordained there at the Church of Domnița Bălașa, the Church of Ascension, which marked somehow my trajectory from the day of baptism. And I was ordained on the day of remembrance of St. Maximus. January again. Yeah, so how do you account for this? So I was born on the day of remembrance of a saint whose relics, at least partially, were kept in the church where I served for 5 years as a deacon. I was baptized in a church dedicated to the Lord's Ascension, which shared this patronal festival with the church where I served as a deacon. And I was studying St. Maximus, and I was ordained on his day of remembrance. Coincidences, but are they meaningful? And then there's another one I think I should mention. As I said last time, the name of my father was, but we still believe in the survival of the soul. So is Vasile, which is a Romanian kind of rendition of Vasilios, Basil, you would say in English. Yeah, and I served as a priest. 4.5 years as an assistant priest, not the parish priest, in a church also in Bucharest, the other side of downtown Bucharest, a church dedicated to St. Basil the Great of Caesarea. Yeah. The son of Basil serving in the church dedicated to St. Basil. And then there's another one. Yeah, coincidences piled up for a while in my life. Yeah. Before I was ordained to diaconate, I worked during my undergraduate years, actually, as an ecclesiastical chanter, singer, for another church in a working class neighborhood, Adormirea Maicii Domnului Militari. So the dormition, or the death rather, of the Lord's Mother in the neighborhood called Militari. Why is this significant? It's because when I left Romania, migrating from the Church of St. Basil in downtown Bucharest to a poor and troubled parish in Sydney, that poor and troubled parish in Sydney was dedicated to the same festival of the Lord's Mother's dormition, Adormirea Maicii Domnului. Yeah, for a while these were the coincidences that I remarked in my life. They were meaningful to me. Somehow they told me that things, as difficult they were for me sometimes, especially in my adult years, you know, from about my 30s, you know, and for many years after. Despite all that trouble, there was a sign of divine providence, a sign of God's mercy, and these coincidences, these patterns would point towards that kept me going, actually. Kept me going. Yeah, and then more recently another coincidence, which again sort of confirmed my choice at some point. I think I mentioned last time in passing the fact that while in Sydney, so from the end of 2004 to date, for a while I served as a priest under the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of Australia, 8 years or so. I don't remember to have remarked any coincidences at that time, but I was thinking of the patterns in my previous life, or patterns I remarked, I noticed previously. But then at the end of 2016, I decided that I should return to my own tradition, Romanian Orthodox. This was a decision determined by many factors, not necessarily related to my church life, more related to my workplace at St. Andrew's Greek Orthodox Theological College, where after 13 years I was simply pushed away. with some pressures. And so in the early days of 2017, I submitted my resignation from both the Greek Church and St. Andrews, and I returned to the Romanian Church. And for a while, actually, I didn't have a proper job. For a few years, it was very difficult to find anything serious anyway. But again, there was another pattern emerging. Another coincidence. Back in the day, in my formative years in Romania, before the fall of the communist regime, I studied for 5 years. I told you the funny story, I think. After year 10, I did 5 more years of high school in the seminary. So I finished high school at 21. And that seminary was dedicated, although called Radu Vod, I told you last time, which means Prince Radu. But the spiritual patron, the patron saint of the seminary was Saint Gregory the Theologian. And surprise, surprise again. In 2017, when I left the Greek Orthodox Church and returned to the Romanian Orthodox Church, this time round there was a bishop. My previous experience with the Romanians in Sydney, there was no bishop, so I depended directly from the Patriarchate in Bucharest, and this actually made my life very difficult with a very, very troubled parish. That's why I left it after 4 years or so. But now there was a Romanian diocese for Australia and New Zealand, and in conversation with my current bishop, His Grace Bishop Mihail, I returned to the Romanian Church, and I did not want to go to an established parish. I didn't want to repeat the problems I had before leaving the Romanian Church. And I asked for his blessing to set up something like a church mission. And he agreed, and he decided that the patron saint of that church should be Saint Gregory the Theologian. So it was a very difficult time for me. I realized this. Living a career, 13 years of work at St. Andrews, 8 years of solid work for the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in various capacities, being elevated to proto-presbyter by the then leader of the Archdiocese, Archbishop Stylianos. May the Lord remember him in his kingdom. All of a sudden I was nowhere, or almost nowhere. And yet another pattern emerged. Back in the day, I studied in the seminary dedicated to St. Gregory, the theologian, and now I was appointed to an inexistent church, which I was supposed to build up. Didn't work so well, but then it doesn't matter. We do what we can, still. A churchlet, again dedicated to St. Gregory the Theologian. Patterns. As I said, I don't, I'm not obsessed, and I'm not obsessing over these patterns, but especially when there are times of uncertainty for me, I look back at my life and I discover these patterns. Call them whatever you like: serendipity, coincidence, concurrence, misfortune. Call them as you will. But for me, they are a source of strength and hope. Keep going, regardless of what happens. Whatever they say, keep going. Do your stuff. And I kept going, and I did my stuff. Yeah. And yeah, so I don't think I want to say more on this note, but perhaps it's something that anyone can discover by looking into their lives. I remember as a young, let's call it theologian or theologically trained person, as an undergraduate, when I started to read the works of the only great theologian of the Romanian Orthodox Church, Father Dumitru Stăniloae, now proclaimed a saint. When was it? Last year? Yeah, so 2025, proclaimed a saint by the same Romanian Church. I started to read his works, and I discovered in his imposing synthesis of dogmatic theology, he called it. I think it's what in our system is called systematic theology. I think I do have it somewhere. I don't know where. Too many hiding places. Yeah, it should be somewhere around here. I'll show it to you some other time. Yeah, he had something there. I think it was in the chapter about the knowledge of God, and he explored various ways of knowing God. There was this section which impressed me much, and I returned to it many times over. Knowing God in, let's say, the circumstances of everyday life, or something to that effect. Read it in Romanian. The book is now translated in various Western languages. German first, I think, French next, and English definitely. I only read the Romanian version, the original. And there he was talking of these various things that happen in life, and especially we become sensitive to these happenings in moments, especially of distress or confusion or uncertainty. And that if we look into our own lives, we might find there, he was saying, signs of divine grace, signs of God's mercy. These are these patterns for me. Yeah, they are a source of comfort, of strength, of hope. Yeah. And so I'm grateful, regardless of the many meanders and adventures and setbacks of my life, especially in terms of my career. I am grateful. The Lord is merciful and gave me signs of not being abandoned. Yeah, not being abandoned. And I keep going. Coincidences sometimes are meaningful. Well, this is where I leave it. Ciao.